And we are back. In recent months, the landscape of labor rights and workplace regulations has undergone significant changes, from the Federal Trade Commission's attempt to ban non-compete agreements to the ongoing Boeing strike, which has seen thousands of workers advocating for fair wages. The dynamics of worker power are shifting. Joining me now, sharing more, is the founding partner of the Boyd Law Group, Patrick J. Boyd. It's always a pleasure to have my friend here with me, and good to have you.
Great to see you again, Daren.
A lot to unpack here. When we talk about non-compete, right, because this took place April 23rd.
That's right.
My birthday, I remember that, right?
Oh,
So
wow, okay.
it was a great day. For some people, it wasn't a great day.
That's right.
But when it came to the issue of non-compete, a law that was passed down that really changes how we see things in the workplace environment.
It certainly does, for the federal government and for our president to get behind an initiative really seeing non-competes as unfair restrictions on what workers can do, and frankly, unfair restrictions or obstructionist restrictions on how the economy can function. If you have a job and you have another better job lined up with a raise, and you can't take that job just because of something you signed and you didn't really know you signed or have a chance about signing, that can be a real restriction on what you can do as a worker and what can happen for the economy and getting the best people in the best places. The unfortunate reality, though, of course, is that the federal government put this initiative in place, and a lot of chambers of commerce got together and challenged it, and their challenge, at least in Texas, was upheld. So the lifting of the restriction and the freedom for workers is still going to be held in abeyance for now, as this filters through the court process. You know?
Right. So when we talk about non-compete, for somebody out there that's watching right now, may not be so familiar about what non-compete is, let's break it down in layman's terms.
Sure. So from top to bottom, workers for a lot of years now have been receiving contracts or agreements, new documentation for their work. And that agreement or that documentation might include something that says, if you leave my job, if you leave this employment and you go somewhere else, and the place you go to is competitive with what you do here, you can't work there, or you have to get our permission to work there, or you have to wait 6 months before you can work there. Pretty much meaning that if you just sit down and read the document, you might not know if you can go from McDonald's to Burger King, or from JP Morgan to Goldman Sachs, or wherever it is when you're trying to move workplaces. And it's scary to think that you might be sued just for going out there and trying to get a better job.
Right. And the reality is, for so many people, that we're just trying to get to the next job.
That's right.
Trying to get to the next job. And I don't know, but on the other side too, before I even take this job, I know how much I need this job. So
right.
I will sign this.
That's right.
But we don't really find out how it goes down until it's the end and I want to leave. And then when I want to leave, here's somebody sticking this piece of paper saying, hey, 6 months, don't you come back on the air here.
That's exactly right. And I think it's fair to say that, exactly as you're saying, a lot of people, when they start a job, they get a ton of paperwork, Daren. And
right.
It's not that they're not thoughtful. They're eager for the new job, and they think of it as just paperwork without necessarily a certain ramification or not. And oftentimes, by the way, they don't have the negotiation power anyways. Mm-hmm. The employer will say, sign it and start, or don't sign it and we'll take the next candidate in line. So
exactly.
Really an unfair restriction in a lot of ways that at least the federal government is taking stock in with this attempted initiative. Mm-hmm. And some states are freeing people from non-competes, like California and some other states. So even though the federal government initiative stopped, states are listening to that initiative and on their own making decisions that may give workers greater freedom. It's just going to take some time to figure out what happens.
Let's talk about home base. How's it looking here in New York with regards to this?
With New York, we had an initiative which failed. So Governor Hochul was trying to get more freedom for more workers. I think it was designed to free workers making less than $155,000. I think maybe 151 or 155,000. But ultimately, the initiative didn't pass. Interestingly enough, the governor is still in favor of having more freedom for workers, but she wanted to have restrictions on higher income workers. And you can understand that, right? If you've got the scientist who designed the secret formula for Coca-Cola, and that scientist makes a lot of money and wants to go to Pepsi, well, Coca-Cola has a reason to say, you know what, we better talk about this before you go.
Right.
But to Governor Hochul's point and the legislative points, for your standard worker who just wants a better job and a better chance and who doesn't have the secret formula to Coca-Cola on their laptop, right?
Right.
This freedom should be one more easy to obtain for workers. So hopefully the federal government's initiative will inform state government efforts and workers will have a better chance at moving more quickly to the jobs that they deserve and have earned.
Yeah.
But it's going to take some time.
As we see it trickle down to the state level, obviously we know where it is with the governor right now. Any anticipation on how long before we can see any more traction on this?
If I had a crystal ball that told me what the legislature would do, I'd be a man in a very different position in my life here. But I think that it's fair to say that both the judges and the legislative leadership in New York are thinking more carefully about this and thinking more of it not just in terms of workers' rights only, but also in terms of making for a more robust economy. If the best workers can make quick, thoughtful choices to the best jobs more quickly, New York's going to do better. And so hopefully this is going to inform the way they try to legislate and the way they decide in the courts.
Because the reality is there's some wage suppression that goes on through this, right?
Of course.
And so let's break that down too from how that works out.
That's exactly right. Because if you've got that job at, let's say you're working at IBM and you've got this opportunity to go to, GE, right? IBM might just want to hold you down a little bit, right? Try to renegotiate with you, tell you you may not be able to start at GE right away. Stay with us, and if GE is giving you a raise, well, you can't have that raise for a while, so stay with IBM, meaning that you're still stuck with that lower wage with IBM for longer. I understand the notion based on that Coca-Cola, Pepsi
And it makes sense.
Right.
Let's be honest. It makes sense at a certain level, right?
That's
it makes
right.
sense when you're at a certain level to say, okay, maybe I can't go here, right? Or like we'll do TV.
Right.
I can't go from 2 to 4 overnight.
Right.
We don't that doesn't happen.
Right.
That's not reality.
Right.
But for somebody at another level, doing this for a YouTube channel,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't make any good sense to say
it doesn't.
I don't want to hold you back. But companies do that, and it's a form of like really just I don't want to call it. I don't even want to call it.
Well,
The best-
it's
the-
handcuffs, right? It's like
Yeah,
the
there it
golden
is.
handcuffs
There
is what
it
you call it
is.
on Wall
I was
Street.
going to use another word, so you bailed
right,
me out.
yes.
Thank you very much. Right, go ahead.
Right. No, but you're absolutely right, and I think you're right in the way you're thinking about it too. The level of complexity is important, right? Does it have some value at some point? Absolutely, and there's reason for that. Does it have value for people making a certain salary under $150,000 to have that freedom to be able to move on and move up? Absolutely, it's important for them to have that freedom, and so hopefully that distinction's being acknowledged. Some states like California just threw the whole thing out. I think that wasn't a bad idea, to be honest with you, but we'll have to see what New York does, and it's going to take some time.
Yeah. Well, a lot of us across the United States are still talking about Boeing.
Yep.
And some people scared to fly, and others are shaking their head. And we know that Boeing is taking a strike, but there is an impact that's being felt through this Boeing strike. First of all, let's bring people up to speed on where we are with Boeing.
So as of today, Boeing decided to reject the most recent overture. Boeing decided to withdraw their most recent overture of an offer to their employees. They were offering, reportedly, about a 30% increase for the workers. The workers were asking for a reportedly 40% increase. Now that's over a period of years, by the way, so roughly 10% a year. And there is still an ongoing battle as to when the workers will start again, collaborate again, and start working with this company that has had its problems already without challenges in the workforce. Now, the interesting thing about this one, Daren, I think, and as an employment lawyer, I've seen this often with companies like Boeing, the workers want better wages, but they also want to be treated better, and the wages are just a reflection of that. It's a part of that issue. There have been some safety concerns with Boeing, right? Two crashes, and then these doors that fell off. And there's been a fair amount of discussion that some of the workers wanted to slow down the rush production to make sure safety was being observed more robustly.
Which sounds like the right thing to do, right?
It sure does to me.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure I'm in the right place.
And so not only are they hoping for better wages and more dignity, but more respect for what they're doing, because their hard work and dedication to the safety of the aircraft is an important dedication to the safety of all of us, right? And so it's been a real challenge for Boeing. And look, on the other hand, Boeing has got to produce. They have Airbus, which is the European competitor, which is driving hard to produce more aircraft, and Boeing's sort of the only meaningful large aircraft producer in the U.S. So they're trying to argue that they want to keep business and they have to keep producing. But a deal has to be made to respect the workers that are making those aircraft fly and keeping them safe.
Right. Let's dial back for a moment a little bit more on that corporate offer from Boeing. What was the last thing they were offering?
The last they offered, I believe, was reportedly a 30% raise over 4 years, and the union was demanding a 40% raise plus reinstatement of pensions. Pension's a big deal too. It's a thing of the past in a lot of private sectors, but it's a really important thing.
You
for
know,
workers.
I think from the average person, I think that without knowing, the airline industry is huge,
Yes.
right? From Boeing all the way down to the airlines. We saw that they received corporate bailouts during the COVID pandemic, right?
Sure.
And but yet and still, when I go catch my flight, the ticket price, and then you see these taxes and all these other things. And so people are just not really too happy about the fact that when it comes to the airline industry, we can't see any level playing field here.
Yeah.
You follow what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
there's something that people are looking for to say, listen, you know what? You got to do better, because all the stuff that's going on around here. When I look at where my experience, I don't fall in. I can't relate,
Yep.
and I think we got to do better.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it would be just like what we were talking about last. I think it would be would be imperfect not to recognize again the complexity of the issues between strikes with pilots and strikes with workers and safety issues. The airline industry is a very, very, very complicated industry, and on the one hand, I completely understand people waiting in line for ridiculous times and feeling like they're getting a dangerous and poor level of service with the airlines these days, for sure. But on the other hand, my wife took a flight to Savannah to visit my daughter, and I think it was for $51.
Yeah.
And think about that. They're going 20,000 feet in the air for 2.5 hours for $51. So in some ways, what the airline industry can do with the right workers and the right collaboration is remarkable. You know?
My thing is meet me in the middle. I mean, listen, as a guy who flies all the time, I need to be met in the middle.
Yes,
and I
agreed.
think that that's what most people want,
Yeah.
right? I think there was a time when airlines were very reasonable and it was easy. And I understand that, as we say, life happens and things have to change, right? But I think for the average consumer and for the business traveler, it's just gotten so bad right now that people are hesitant about flying. We're praying for people in Florida right now who are literally on 4, 5, 6 hours in the airport, and to hear that we don't even have adequate staff. These are challenges that are every day, and so what I'm leading to is that there has to be a voice for this, right?
That's right.
The voice of this many times turns out to be the unions who amplify their voice and say, listen, you got to take care of my employees. You have to take care of these people here. We will not be disregarded, or we're going to hit the streets on strike.
That's right.
And we have seen throughout the course of the last couple of years an emergence of union power. What are we seeing from your perspective about that power of unions that's really advocating and speaking and giving voice to the voiceless?
So absolutely true, and the summer of 23 has been called the summer of strikes in some communities, just because last year there were so many strikes and so many things leading up to what's happening now. I think, to put it historically, unions had a great deal of power, and at its apex in sort of the Jimmy Hoffa days, where they were maybe 30 or 40% of the private sector, they got all the way down to about 6 or 7% of the private sector. So they got really, really decreased power, decreased number of people in unions, right? And maybe that pendulum is swinging back a little bit, which is helpful. When I was practicing labor and employment law and negotiating these contracts, I was traditionally negotiating for 3 to 4% raises for workers. And you'll see these raises in these contracts now we're talking about are 10 to 12% per year for workers. So there is an increase in power and an increase in recognition, I think, on behalf of the employer, that they need to provide for and support the workers that are staying with them. There's also this recognition that they're not going to have people sticking around if they don't continue to increase their wages and benefits and give them an opportunity to share in the wealth that they help to create, right? For sure. I think the other thing that's added to the power, particularly in places like Boeing, and we'll talk about the Longshoreman too, post-COVID, some of these businesses that had been asking for union concessions because businesses were shut down started to make a lot of money when things started up again, and not returning that profit to the workers that were working with them quickly enough. So the workers said, we cut when things were bad. We accepted those concessions. We knew it was a tough time for our country, for our world. Now it's time for us to share again in that wealth that we're helping to create. And maybe with these union initiatives and these better contracts that are being negotiated and these strikes, maybe workers are starting to get that chance in having a good say again about better benefits, better pay, better pensions maybe again, all kinds of great things.
Maybe, right?
Maybe.
We have to wait and see. I mean, it's there. Talk to us a little. We want to discuss healthcare and workers, there, and talk about the worker strikes.
Yeah.
Going back to Boeing, right?
Yep.
They made a decision.
Yep.
And here we go.
That's right.
The decision is let's cut insurance.
Yep. Cut insurance, completely take away pensions, which is, wow, it's the kind of thing that everybody's counting on. It's one of the few reasons that people would stay with a company like that, because they uniquely are large enough to have those kind of pensions. I think the other real good tale to tell in terms of maybe union success is with the Longshoreman, right, with the strike that has just come, because the employer in that case has agreed at this point to pay 10% per year times 6 years, recognizing the importance of the longshoremen's work and these things. So meaningful success. And by the way, they're not done.
Right.
That's just what they agreed to so far as they continue to negotiate the contract further. But that was another big union with some power. Think about it. About half the trade of the United States comes through our ports. So that was $3 to $5 billion per day being lost with those workers on strike. That they actually decided to wield that power, get some better results, and it made a difference. Made a difference.
Made a difference. I want to switch fronts for a minute, talk a little bit, take me down to Wall Street.
Sure.
We had a worker that was there.
Yeah.
Died.
Yes.
And the cause of death being overworked.
Overworked, that's right. Technically, some heart failure based upon what seemed to have been work weeks in excess of 100 hours, which is a 12-hour day times 7 days a week, plus some, if you will, in terms of intensity.
So 100 hours a week, right? Let's say we have 168 hours in a week.
That's right.
Right? So you're working 100 hours a week.
Yep.
Not adequate rest.
Nope.
And yet and still the end result is the person is dead. Now where do we go from here? There's some litigation being looked at.
Yeah, well, it's I don't know if funny is the right word, but it goes to show you how little correction was made. Bank of America, this young man worked for Bank of America, right? About 10 years ago, they had another issue, almost identical, an overworked worker passing away because of working over 100 hours a week or something. At the time, they put in place a regulation that said that managers had to monitor the amount of hours that workers were putting in, right? And try to give them just some livable conditions. Now, bankers make good money sometimes, for sure, right? But you still need to sleep, you still need to rest, not only to feel good about yourself and your life and your family, but also, frankly, just to sustain yourself and to do good work, right? I don't think anybody's doing great work on hour 90 of the week in which they're working 100 hours,
break
right?
it down for a minute and say 12 hours a day times 7 is 84,
That's right.
So that means if I'm working a 12-hour day, 7 days a week,
Yep.
that's 84 hours.
Right.
You just said to me
Another
this person's-
16.
Right. So now you add on another 16.
Yep.
You don't. The average amount of rest is supposed to be 8 hours a day.
That's right.
Right.
Yep.
So the math just ain't math.
No, absolutely right. And so Bank of America decided to redouble their efforts now to require 1 day of rest be provided to their workers, 1 day, right? And that the workers couldn't be, quote unquote, pressured into writing down or discounting the number of hours they worked. How effective that will be is still in debate.
Right.
Interestingly enough, JP Morgan Chase, in deciding to follow Bank of America, said we will try to adhere to the same standards, but if it's a sensitive deal time, all bets are off. right?
I'm just the guy on the other side of the camera. But I think common sense says that if we can make laws about this, there ought to be a certain law in place to say how many hours
Right.
a person can work a week, and not in excess of that, because that exceeds, health and whatever the case may be. It opens somebody up for liability.
Sure. Well, absolutely right. And to your point, you'll hear all the time about the evolved European countries like France mandating a 35-hour work week or a 40-hour work week. And I would take your language on this. Let's meet in the middle somewhere, right? And
Right.
try to find some kind of solution. But the thing that and I went to school with a lot of people that went to Wall Street, right? They went to Dartmouth and then went on to Wall Street and worked those hours. And all of them would tell me and concede to me when I talked to them, sort of in an informal setting. I don't even know, Patrick, that I'm doing decent work after hour 60 or 61. I'm there. I'm putting in my FaceTime. I'm in front of the computer.
They'll tell you they don't even know if they're doing average work at the hour 8.
That's right. Of
You
course.
talk about-
Of course.
right.
Of course. So sometimes this hard driving just for the sake of hard driving isn't good for. It's not good for our health. It's not good for our families. But it's not even good for the business in which you're practicing if you can't focus and you can't do quality work in those extra hours. Hopefully, it's an unfortunate loss
So
of
will we
life.
see?
Of course.
I mean, it's my wish list, but will we see a law with limitations?
I doubt it. I doubt it. Maybe in factory settings or places where there's an easy way to control some of the hours, although the Amazon data isn't terribly compelling in that sense, right? But maybe there'll be a little bit of a better way to control things. But there is, in some of these white-collar roles, and I don't want to compare, they're working very hard, but in these white-collar roles, it's very hard to control how many hours somebody's going to work, when they're going to get the texts, off time, out of the office. How are you going to monitor it? And workers who want to get ahead, they're not going to complain collectively because they fear that just behind them is somebody else willing to do that extra hour from 90 to 95, that hours from 95 to 100. This young man who passed away, he was a former Green Beret.
Right,
You're
which
talking
gives
about
you the thought that he was in pretty decent shape.
tremendous stamina, tremendous discipline, and still being overworked by the system in this case.
It's something to be said when you think about the fact that this gentleman was a Green Beret, served our country and served in such a tremendous way, definitely on the front lines.
Right.
And you come back to Wall Street.
Yep.
And you don't die in service in the Green Beret.
You die in service of a deal. Right.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
It's not the economy working for him or for Bank of America or for us, or for it's not the way work is supposed to be.
Right. That was in service to a business and not a country.
That's right.
And that's horrible.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
Let me just go back for a second and twist up here. Inflation.
Mhm.
Huge right now, right?
Yep.
And most Americans are really trying to couple and deal with the fact of inflation.
Yep.
And I also know that unions are really trying to work inflation into their argument and things of that nature to negotiate.
We need a raise because rents cost more, groceries cost more. We need a raise to meet those increased costs. Yes. of
How's
course.
it going?
I think the best answer is unevenly, right? The unions are getting better deals, but let's remember, historically speaking, unions are still representing a very, very, very small part of the workplace. There aren't that many people who have unions, right? So the advocacy for increased wages and increased opportunities to get paid for what you're doing, and so you can provide for your family, is not being advocated for. The best choice is often leaving your job, and then we've got these non-competes, which we talked about, that make it harder to leave your job, right? So I think there's a lot of knots to untie as time goes on, and what I worry about a little bit is that the most recent numbers suggested that the hot job market is starting to cool off. So the opportunity for workers to leave for a better role, a better salary, better benefits, maybe waning before it even took place sufficiently to take care of people and give them that chance to take that next step up. I hope that's not what's going to happen, but I think it's possible that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's some troubled times. Huh?
Yeah. The one thing I would say, I'm sorry to interrupt, both presidential candidates, at the time it was Biden and Trump, but both of them were in support of some of the unions that were acting out in the Midwest with the auto strikes. So I do think that there is a collective support for unions, particularly amongst younger people, that is growing and that is crossing party lines. And maybe that's going to allow for some more powerful legislation and some more powerful opportunities for unions to advocate for workers and for workers to advocate for themselves.
But we also have the Teamsters on one side. Not talk to me here. The Teamsters not backing the Democratic candidate.
That's right. For the first time since Clinton in '96, and the reason they didn't back him at that time was because of NAFTA and all the issues there. So, yeah, the Teamsters politically and their leadership believe, and I think accurately, that the Democratic candidate is far more aligned with workers' rights and workers' opportunities, absolutely. But the rank and file membership did not have the requisite voting support for the Harris ticket. So the party, instead of deciding to declare in favor of a candidate where they didn't think they had enough membership support, decided not to declare in favor. Now, there are still pockets of this, right? So there are still places where Teamsters are rallying significantly behind Harris, as an example. But it's in some ways surprising that what we're talking 30 years was the last time that the Teamsters, a very powerful union, wasn't fully aligned with the Democratic Party. And I don't know, Daren, to be honest with you, if that's partially because the Democratic Party hasn't done enough, or partially if the idea is that the Democratic Party has aspirations that they're not being able to deliver upon. And because they're not delivering, because there's no doubt that the platform is more demonstrative and supportive of workers' rights, right? But workers, there aren't that many with unions. So not many of them have those rights, if you will. And so maybe it doesn't mean enough for them. And maybe the politics of the platform aren't being administered to with enough success for workers to see the party as making things better. They're trying, but if they're not getting anywhere, maybe the workers are voting on other issues.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I want to talk to you about how things are going in the courtroom, because I know we've had this conversation before, coming out of COVID, courtroom backlog, right? And being able to really litigate cases and do cases. I know there have been alternatives, judges have created, but, lawyers are still saying, listen, we still got our challenges here. What are you feeling?
I think that there has been a great deal of increased efficiency by those judges, and it depends on the judge, with those judges who have been willing to take camera-based or Zoom-based conferences, because instead of people having to travel to go to court and all meeting at 9:30 and then waiting for their turn for an hour and a half, people can get on and off and then go on with their other work, and the courts can be quite efficient that way. Some judges who haven't caught up with the technology, that efficiency is lost. The other thing I would say is this, though. The fundamental truth is that maybe 96 to 98% of cases settle at some point. And settlement is often done when the attorneys have a chance to meet face-to-face and talk about the case and talk about the strengths and weaknesses and maybe collaborate and try to solve their client's problems, as opposed to just arguing in front of a court. When lawyers aren't doing that, when they're not traveling to the courthouse, not sitting in the courthouse waiting for their chance to get in front of the judge, not meeting in person, not talking, I think that opportunity for collaboration and resolution is being lost. And as a result, I think, to the extent that as lawyers we're problem solvers, our opportunities to solve those problems are either being delayed or denied because there isn't as much attendance in the courthouse. So hopefully that will change over time. I think it's more efficient on shallow things and less efficient on deeper things, is the way I'd explain it now, but that's just one attorney's opinion.
One attorney's opinion. Your opinion counts here, buddy. Patrick Boyd, good to see you, brother.
Always a pleasure.
Come on back, all right?
Of course.